There are whispers in the shadows, stories whispered on streets just like yours. They tell of ordinary places, homes with manicured lawns and the glow of warm kitchens hiding something sinister beneath the surface. Tonight we delve into those whispers. Tonight we explore 3 true neighborhood horror stories. The next morning, Mr. Harrington was gone, vanished without a trace. The police were called, but despite their best efforts, they found no sign of him. Mrs. Harrington, driven to the brink by grief and terror, swore she could still hear his voice whispering from the walls, begging for help. The house on Maple Street stood empty for months, a constant reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. But the darkness that had taken root there refused to be contained. It spread slowly but surely to the other houses on the street. The once peaceful neighborhood was gripped by fear, the idyllic facade shattered by the unseen force that haunted Maple Street. S1, they're here for us. Narrator, Maple Street. Sounds pleasant enough, doesn't it? A street lined with maple trees, leaves turning vibrant shades of red and gold in the fall, kids playing hopscotch on the sidewalk, neighbors chatting over white picket fences. But this isn't a storybook, and Maple Street holds a secret, a darkness that has seeped into the very foundation of the homes there. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of a light bulb, a door creaking open on its own. Unexplained noises in the dead of night, like footsteps in the attic when everyone was sound asleep. The Harringtons, who lived at number 7, were the first to experience it. It started with whispers, soft at first, like the wind sighing through the trees. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, morphing into disembodied voices that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. Then came the shadows, fleeting glimpses at the edge of their vision. A figure standing at the foot of the bed, gone when they turned on the light. A cold spot in the hallway that seemed to linger, no matter how high they cranked up the heat. Their dog, a usually boisterous golden retriever, refused to enter certain rooms, whimpering and cowering at closed doors. The Harringtons tried to rationalize it, told themselves it was just an old house settling or their imaginations running wild. But deep down, a primal fear began to take root. It wasn't long before the activity escalated. Objects began to move on their own, a vase crashing to the floor, a picture flying off the wall, doors slammed shut with no explanation, the sound echoing through the empty house like gunshots. Every neighborhood has its dark corners, places where the streetlights don't quite reach, and shadows seem to linger a little longer. In this neighborhood, that place was the alleyway that cut between Oak and Elm Street. It was a narrow, trash-strewn passage, shunned by most as a shortcut to avoid after dark. But for some, the alley held a different kind of darkness, a palpable fear that clung to the air like the stench of rotting garbage. It started with whispers, tales of fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure lurking in the dim light. Some dismissed it as just rats or stray cats, but others weren't so sure. There was something about the way people spoke of the shadow. Their voices hushed, their eyes wide with a fear they couldn't quite mask. Then came the encounters.
I felt a presence behind me, a cold shiver that ran down my spine. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Suddenly I heard footsteps, heavy and slow, echoing off the brick walls. I didn't dare turn around, didn't want to know what lurked in the darkness behind me. I broke into a run, my breath catching in my throat, my lungs burning. I could hear the footsteps gaining on me. Closer now, the sound heavy and relentless. Finally, I burst out of the alley and into the relative safety of the streetlight's glow. I didn't stop running until I reached my front door, fumbling with my keys. My hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. Once inside, I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, gasping for breath, my heart still racing. I never saw what was chasing me, but I knew, deep in my gut, that it was something evil, something that haunted the shadows of the alleyway.
Word of her encounter spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People were afraid. They avoided the alley at all costs, their fear fueled by the unknown. The alleyway remained a place of fear and dread, a dark stain on the neighborhood's otherwise pristine facade. Whatever the truth, the shadow in the alley remained a chilling reminder that even in the most ordinary of places, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. At the end of a quiet, tree-lined street, nestled among well-kept gardens and houses bathed in the warm glow of porch lights, lived a man named Mr. Smith. He was an enigma, a recluse who kept to himself, rarely venturing out of his dilapidated Victorian home at the edge of the neighborhood. His lawn was overgrown, weeds pushing their way through cracks in the sidewalk, the paint on his house peeling like sunburned skin. He was an outcast, shunned by the other residents, the subject of whispered rumors and wary glances.
Mr. Smith didn't seem to mind the isolation. He had always been a solitary man, content in his own company, or so it seemed. He spent his days puttering around his garden, his hunched figure barely visible amongst the overgrown foliage, a wide-brimmed straw hat always shading his face.
At night, he would sit in his dimly lit living room, the flickering light of a television casting eerie shadows on the walls, the sound of static the only indication of life within the old house. The neighborhood children, fueled by a mixture of curiosity and fear, spun tales of the strange man and his dilapidated house. They dared each other to run up to his porch and ring the doorbell, giggling as they ran away, their laughter echoing in the stillness of the evening air.
They whispered rumors of strange smells emanating from the house, of lights flickering on and off at odd hours, of muffled sounds like cries for help coming from within the boarded-up windows. The adults dismissed their stories as childish fantasies, but secretly, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease about their reclusive neighbor.
There was something unsettling about Mr. Smith's silence, about the way he seemed to watch them from behind his overgrown hedges, his eyes cold and calculating. It was the new family, the Millers, who first noticed the missing pets. It started with their cat, Whiskers, a fluffy ginger tabby who loved to bask in the sunbeams on their front porch. One day Whiskers didn't come home for dinner. The Millers searched high and low, calling his name, but Whiskers was gone.
Then a week later, the Thompsons' Labrador, Buddy, disappeared. He was last seen playing fetch in the park across from Mr. Smith's house. The disappearances continued one after another, each one more unsettling than the last. The once peaceful neighborhood was gripped by fear, the idyllic facade shattered by the unknown. Suspicion, fueled by fear and paranoia, fell upon Mr. Smith.
The rumors intensified, whispers of animal sacrifices, of dark rituals taking place under the cover of night in that dilapidated house at the edge of the neighborhood. The police were called to question Mr. Smith, but they found no evidence to connect him to the missing pets. He denied any involvement, his voice a raspy whisper, his eyes cold and emotionless. He was a man of few words, his silence speaking volumes.
The disappearances continued, and the fear in the neighborhood grew. Parents kept their children indoors, their laughter replaced by an eerie silence. The once vibrant community had become a ghost town, haunted by the unknown.
One night, a group of teenagers, emboldened by alcohol and a desire to prove their bravery, decided to take matters into their own hands. Armed with baseball bats and flashlights, they crept up to Mr. Smith's house, their hearts pounding in their chests. They peered through the dusty windows, their breath fogging up the glass. But they couldn't see anything inside. The house was dark, silent, as if it were holding its breath. One of the teenagers, a tall, lanky boy named Jason, picked up a rock and hurled it through the front window. The sound of shattering glass echoed in the stillness of the night, breaking the spell that had settled over the neighborhood.
Suddenly, the front door of the house creaked open, and Mr. Smith emerged, his eyes glowing in the darkness. He stood there for a moment, his gaze fixed on the terrified teenagers, a chilling smile spreading across his face. Then, he beckoned them inside, his voice a low, guttural growl. "Come in," he whispered. "I've been expecting you."
The teenagers, their bravado gone, turned and ran, their screams echoing through the empty streets. They didn't stop running until they reached the safety of their homes. The image of Mr. Smith's smiling face burned into their minds. The next morning, the police arrived at Mr. Smith's house, armed with a search warrant. The house was empty. The horrors that unfold in our own neighborhoods are often the most unsettling. The haunted house on Maple Street, the shadow that stalked the alleyway, and the silent neighbor with his unspeakable secrets. These stories remind us that darkness can lurk even in the most familiar of places. What about you? Have you ever experienced something unexplainable in your own neighborhood? Share your stories in the comments below if you dare. And if you enjoyed this journey into the dark heart of the suburbs, be sure to subscribe for more terrifying tales. Sleep tight and remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that live right next door.